Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us on our second day of talks, panels and discussions as part of Tomorrow Today. I'm Michael Hoare, I'm an independent consultant and I've been working on this project with Severn Arts as project manager. This is produced by the Arches Festivals team at Severn Arts. It's a 3-day online programme exploring both practical advice and guidance on what festival organisers will need to consider when staging outdoor events, as well as the relationship between festivals, communities and placemaking post-COVID. In January 2019, Worcester was one of 5 cities to be awarded cultural development funding from the DCMS with the aim of locking the city's creative and economic growth by placing culture at the heart of regeneration and cultural development, economic development. The project has 4 strands: restoring 8 Victorian railway arches into creative industry spaces, a skills development programme to encourage young people to stay in the city, a destination management plan, and an ambitious festivals programme. The festivals programme is managed and produced through Severn Arts. Severn Arts is a thriving charitable arts company based here in Worcester, bringing high quality music and arts across the county through innovative partnership working. You can find out more about what both Severn Arts and the Arches Festivals Worcester online at severnarts.org.uk. Now this session, New to Outdoor Arts, is to support outdoor festivals at community and small scale level in putting on outdoor arts activity, possibly for the first time. The session is introductory. It focuses on basic practical things from artistic decisions to thinking about audience, marketing and essential things to plan for, financial decisions and how to bring it all together on the day of the event. I'll be posing a series of questions, and I hope there'll be questions from you in the audience too, to David Edmunds, who is Festivals Director at the Arches Festivals. So we're going to be lucky enough to really sort of have the chance to reach into the mind of somebody who does this every day. So just a couple of items of housekeeping before we get into today's session. You can see that I'm joined by Laura, who's going to be interpreting the session. She's actually doing it already. When we get to the and please make use when we get to the session itself, please make use of the chat function if you'd like to introduce yourself and your organisation if you're part of one, and feel free to use this throughout the session too. Towards the end of the session we'll be taking questions, so please direct questions for this session to the Q&A box below. You can make it anonymous if you wish. So let's get started. I'm now going to introduce David Edmunds, the Festival Director at Severn Arts, the Arches Festivals. David's biography should appear on the screen at the same time David appears. Hello, David.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well. Are you well?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Great to see you. So I hope we're going to have a really interesting discussion this afternoon. It's going to be a conversation broken into a series of kind of topics, but first of all, I'm going to ask you some questions about artistic and programming decisions and how you might make those decisions. I know that from the kind of pre-day survey we did, people expressed that they're very, very interested in this particular topic. So my first question is a really kind of soft opening one, really, which is, for you, what informs the artistic program decisions that you make when you're approaching programming outdoor arts?
Great question. I think not only in that, but pretty much everything that we kind of try and do starts with the audience, and we're thinking about who are we programming for, what are we trying to say with that program, what do we want that audience to take away, and that could be something really deep and meaningful, or it could be pure entertainment, pure putting a smile on somebody's face. But I'm always thinking about what do I want the audience to take from what we're programming it. Is it specific audience type? Is it a specific type of event? Has it got a theme? Has it got a history that we need to tie into? Is it more populist? Is it niche? But kind of really being clear on what that is, and then kind of thinking about who that audience is and what do I want them to take away from the program, and saying that can be really varied. It can be quite small, or it could be kind of much broader and quite deep in terms of sort of things you want them to take away from that work. But I think it's always thinking about, what do I want the audience to feel when they come away having engaged with that piece of work.
So I'm keen, it's a really interesting answer, and I'm keen to get some examples so people can really get a picture. Could you give us a sense, could you give us an example of something where you've programmed something, where you've really thought about the audience, a little example of something which sort of illustrates what you're talking about?
Yeah, there's a huge amount. I mean, when I first started programming, outdoor arts, I was fortunate. I'd worked in indoor venues. I'd worked in with touring companies, and I was fortunate to work as part of the team for Liverpool Capital of Culture back in 2008. And so we had quite large scale work and large scale budgets, and the everything that comes with being a capital of culture. But it was looking at kind of the small work as well, and what we wanted that to do and where. So programming, we programmed a Merseyside based choreographer called Lizzie Perry to make a piece of work that was performed on train stations between Liverpool and London, and at every train station the company got off the train, performed on the platform, and had another company coming from London doing the same, and they met in Crewe, because Crewe was kind of in the middle. So even though we were doing these huge large-scale projects as part of Liverpool that were citywide with very big budgets, that was actually quite a small project because it involved Lizzie as the choreographer. It involved the dancers she was working with and an element of some community dancers as well. But the logistics in terms of getting, Network Rail and Virgin on board and permissions to perform at stations and how will the audience perform, and we wanted to have this sense of sort of disrupting the flow of a normal day. And disrupting that work and that journey to your work. But you have to be really careful in doing that actually, you don't, if people don't want to be disrupted, even with something that's fun and playful and engaging, they've got that option to not be. So you have to be quite careful, I think, in terms of when you're doing things to an audience, that they've got that option out if they want to, but if they want to be drawn into it, and they are. So that was very much thinking about, what do we want to happen on the train? What do we want to happen on the platform? Where will people be? So practical considerations. And I think that's something we'll talk more about later. But I think when you're programming outdoor work, you've got to work really closely with your tech and production and event safety teams about, how do we work with an audience, as opposed to here's the work and the audience are secondary. They sit and watch. They're very much often engaged or involved and in a different way that you don't have in a venue. So that'd be, an example of a project, say, where we're really thinking about how the audience engages with the work, but also how we don't disrupt them too much, but how we can work with them around the space, what dancers might need to do differently, because kind of, can we perform in the aisles? What are the health and safety connotations of that? If someone's trying to get their case off, are they happy that there's a dancer in the way? And just kind of all those sorts of things that you don't think about when you're in a rehearsal studio making a new piece of dance, drama or theatre.
Sounds absolutely fascinating, and it sounds like every situation is a different one with different kind of considerations. And are there any kind of, that's quite an advanced example, are there any kind of more straightforward day-to-day examples of where you've kind of programmed something, thinking of our audience today, where you might have programmed something a little bit more kind of straightforward in a setting that's a bit more traditional and day-to-day?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the traditional walkabout work, and I think we'll talk about that a bit later on, but kind of that sort of the stuff that's come out of the street theatre tradition and kind of that long history of that, those where you're just animating spaces. So you're putting interesting, creative, often fun and playful, short performances that walk around, and you've maybe got 2 or 3 of those a day in unusual spaces. So, you'll see that now in shopping centres, you'll see that in kind of all sorts of places. So that sort of stuff is a real easy win in terms of the sort of, it tends to be often cost effective. There are some great organisations that program that sort of work. So agencies like False Paradise, who are an agency that specialise in that walkabout work. There's different themes. So if you're going, well, I want something that's really Christmassy, because it's for we've got a Christmas market and we want some performance work as part of that Christmas market, going to those types of agency and being able to see what the work is, to see the video links. That the beauty now is that that so much is available in terms of for you to look at before booking, that those days where you're going, well, how do I go and see this work? So you could book to go and see a show and go, yes, I like that show and I'm going to program it for my venue. with outdoor work is that, well, how do you happen upon walkabout work if you're not there? Whereas now, somewhere like Fool's Paradise, and there are lots of other agencies as well, they will have videos and links on their website for all of the acts you can book. So you can really see that work. You can see testimonials from organisations that have booked their work. You can see audience feedback. So it gives you a sort of sense of kind of where that would fit. And I think, you're, again, thinking about your audience. That is it that you just want to animate a space? Is it that you've got a whole load of people in a shopping centre on a Saturday and you just want something that's going to kind of make the kids smile, or going to be something a little bit different? I think we're becoming, certainly we're pre-COVID, and it'd be interesting to see what happens post it, where we were talking more about destinations, and I think some of the stuff we'll talk on more tomorrow around place, but whereas you no longer go to a shopping centre just to go and buy some consumable goods. It's a lifestyle, and there are other things you are wanting out of that. So again, walkabout work for those sorts of kind of arenas is really, really useful, and a good starting point if you're wanting to kind of start working with performance-based work outdoors and haven't done bigger stuff. There's time to build up to that.
So it really sounds like the kind of work that you're talking about and that the audience might do that are listening today is really going to kind of complement that change to the high street. But what you're talking about, and I know from having talked to you before, you've used these kind of phrases like disrupting the flow, animating spaces, programming work that's in places that's playful and fun, and short performances and so on. It's kind of a very different way of thinking than kind of traditional theatre or other art forms, I think. And obviously you're trying to locate things in a way that reflects the place and reflects the audience.
Yeah, it's about moments, and it's about kind of giving people those moments that I think that there's a huge amount of arts and culture that claims it's going to change your life, and I've sat through a lot of those shows and they didn't change my life, but I've also had some really amazing moments that have been life affirming or have made me think differently about something. So I'm always keen that we're trying to create moments, and they may be short, they may be longer, and it's about putting them, say, in unusual spaces. I think that the beauty of outdoor arts is that you remove a huge number of barriers, and you haven't got to necessarily book a ticket, and you haven't got to go, is this for me? And there's still a huge sort of like, do you have to dress up to go to the theatre? I think there's an honesty of when you put work in a square in a market town in the north of England, you get a different dialogue with that audience, and it's just kind of giving them something that's a little bit different, and access to that. And it, you could be programming some really avant-garde European work, but if you put it in the right context, the audiences see it for what it is, and that's it might be fun and playful, or it might be sad and moving, but it becomes, you strip away some of those barriers, and I think that's one of the beauty of kind of our sector in terms of that genuine kind of take with audiences. So I think that that's what we're trying to create each time. So these little moments where that you might only engage for a minute, and it might be on your walk from a station back home, but if it made you smile, then that's not a bad thing. So I think there's a lot of things that we have to question, is it worthy, or is it kind of change my worldview or my political view, or then you also go, actually there's nothing wrong with making people smile. I know I take a great deal of satisfaction to see audience that if they laugh, if they smile, if they're filming it on their phone and sending it to their mates going, look at this is great. That sense of playfulness, particularly in urban environments, in town centres, in city centres, I think is really good for places, and I think it's something we were seeing a lot more of, and I think that's only going to grow as we try and reimagine those civic spaces.
Yeah, I think you're giving us a fantastic insight into some of the kind of logic that sits behind some of the choices that someone like you, a professional like you, makes. It's really, really interesting, and hopefully it's helpful for the audience to kind of get a feel for some of that. So let me ask a couple of other questions. You've hinted at where you might find some of the work. So there's some agencies that the specialist agencies where we can go and have a look. It's user friendly. We can look on their website. We can check reviews. Are there other ways as well?
Yeah, I think there's obviously as I just mentioned about Fool's Paradise as an agency. I'm not on commission with them, but they're great. I've used them a lot. I've programmed their artists. So that's a really good resource. There are others. So there is Outdoor Arts UK, who are an advocacy body for outdoor arts. They have a directory, and there's various shows in there. So again, you can go and look, and you can get a feel, and you can see what's out there. Also, our sector is really good at sharing. So, you can talk to other places. So if you were a local authority and you'd got a regular Sunday farmers market, and you're going, oh, we might like to, how do we take it to that next level? How do we kind of add more to that? Then, there's probably a local authority or others that have already done that and will share that information. So there are easy networks where people will share. They'll share knowledge of artists. They'll say, oh yeah, we booked that company and they were really good to work with. The audience loved them. It was professional. It was really easy for us. I think our sector is very good at making it easy for the end user, because particularly that end user often isn't used to our world. So if we take a show to a theatre, well, that theatre is geared up to being a theatre to do what we're trying to do. If we are booked to take a work to a shopping centre or a market or a park, that those things aren't geared up to do what we do. So our sector is very good at making that easy and going, right, we can make your life really simple and deliver all those things. So I think that's a big one. So being able to kind of share those, and as you start to program more, getting out and seeing stuff in your locality, you'll know there are other places that maybe do certain events you can go and look at and just get a feel for the type of work. I think having that clear, artistic vision is maybe a little bit grand, but it's that sense of, what are you trying to do? What are you wanting? What is the feel you want? And once you know that, you can start to narrow down the type of work you may want to kind of come to. And then, you might get more ambitious as you kind of expand. It's not kind of, launching into something that if you've never programmed work in your capacity, in your location before, to suddenly go, right, we'll dive in with something that needs 4 days of setup, and we're looking at big road closures and those elements, that it's, the dangers you do that and you might never do it again. So it's building towards those places where a place gets what you're trying to do and understands that the disruption is worth it. Outdoor arts can come with disruption. Mm-hmm. And not just in terms of kind of, as we were talking about earlier about audience, but in terms of, well, they were outside my shop and, did that block people getting in? So you have to be mindful of that. But also you might find that shop had trebled the amount of business it normally has. So again, those relationships, and I think we'll talk about that later on in terms of marketing and kind of stakeholders. But I think it's knowing clearly what you're trying to do, and take those steps. But the more you see and the more you talk and share, that then you'll build a knowledge really quickly. I think it's a sector where you can acquire knowledge of companies and types of work very quickly from a point of no experience. Whereas say if you're programming for a concert hall or a theatre, it's completely different. But I think this is a sector you can, is easy to penetrate.
That's brilliant. So checking out other events, using your network, using the specialist agencies, and the kind of things you talked about where, some shows might have a really long setup and require a lot of kind of technical equipment. That will be visible, will it, when you're trying to make that booking and exploring on those agencies' websites for how long the setup will be and so on?
Yeah, it often is, but it's also, not being afraid to ask those questions. And again, because outdoor arts organisations are used to dealing in non-traditional, as we call them, spaces, they've been asked every question, and the really good ones will provide that in a list that when you make that inquiry, again, here's all the things you might be thinking about, or here's all the things we think we need to tell you about. But again, it's on the whole, it's a sector with artists where they're more than happy to answer those questions. They want you to have a positive experience of booking them. They want it to be as straightforward and as easy as possible. So if you have a question, that feels like a daft question. If you don't know the answer to it, I'd ask it, and being brave enough to say, how does that work, or how long does it take you to kind of set that up? particularly say if you have no knowledge and experience. And again, as it builds, you go, okay, walkabout stuff, yeah, they need an hour before their first show, but they need 2 hours in between, you know, asking those questions, what breaks do they need? And that dialogue back and forward, it's sort of investing in that, can make the event feel, it makes the artist feel more comfortable with them coming to the event that maybe they don't know, and they feel that there's been sort of care and work put in on the other side. But it also gives you as the event organizer that kind of confidence to know that, yeah, no, we've covered all the things we need to cover.
That's fantastic. It was really helpful. And what do you do about the thorny question of quality and ensuring you're getting a high quality kind of product? I know it's always a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, quality is a huge question, isn't it? Because it's often very subjective, and we will often, you know, with teams, our festivals team here, but also where I've worked previously, we'll talk about the difference between taste and quality, and they're hugely different. You know, taste is subjective. Everybody here today could go and see a film tonight, and we might have a different view of whether we liked it or not, and that's taste. Quality is, well, actually, was it filmed, you know, in a certain way? Did it have kind of the right credits? Did the, you know, were the all those bits that feel like it's got quality to it? So I think again, you can. I'd look at where else that work's been, you know, and again, you can see that from people's websites, and have those conversations. So, you know, if it's a piece of work that you don't know, or an artist you don't know that's been to Gloucester, and, you know, pick up the phone and ask that organisation, if it's the council, going, how was it, and did it work? And you'll very quickly build that picture. But I think that being you. I will often program work that isn't necessarily my taste, because I strongly believe as a programmer, it's not my kind of private art gallery. It's not for me to program things that I like, but I am programming things I think will work and will do a certain job for me within a program. But I have to feel really comfortable around the quality, and that's, you know, if you're doing, you can have some of the smallest individual solo clown performer, but that could be, you know, has to be outstanding quality. You know, it could be a world leading practitioner from Europe, or it could be somebody that's suddenly gone, oh, I'm going to be a clown and stick a wig on. And, you know, and again, there's a difference. You've still got the same potential thing, but you've got to look at that quality. So again, I think it's down to that research. Again, if you're booking through, you know, agencies or recommendations, you know, that's a good starting point to kind of then build up that kind of confidence. And in your locality, if you're programming local artists, you might know of them already, or know of kind of their work, or you've seen them and you go, actually that may fit. So it's worth doing the sort of work on that. But again, I think it's a lot easier to do that than it is trying to sort of, you know, go to a theatre and see work, or a concert hall. It's the sector makes it easier for you, because we know we're dealing with an audience base that's really, really broad and wide, and outside of those usual spaces.
So it's a really user-friendly sector. I like that. We've had a question from the audience that relates to this bit, so we're going to have it now. Okay. Which is, can David explain what walkabout performances are, please?
Yeah, sure. So walkabouts, again, it's really broad, so don't quote me on it word for word, but walkabouts tend to be one or two, or you know, small number of performers, and they will move about a space. So there isn't a stage, there isn't seating, there isn't necessarily a set performance with a start, middle and end. They often do perform in blocks, so they may be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, depends if they are big elaborate costumes, so things like stilt walkers, you might have fire eaters, you might have specific acts, and acts may be themed, so there may be you know, giants, there may be fairies, all sorts of kind of different. If you can think of it, I would imagine there's a walkabout act that covers it creatively, but they will move around a place and are happy to. Some will interact with an audience. That's part of it. So they may be events where they're giving out stickers, or they're giving out flyers or badges, or they may have part of their act where they engage with an audience and are playful with it. Or they may be just there to kind of animate a space and make it look more interesting. So there isn't that interaction, but it's very much on the move. You will agree with them a predetermined sort of route or where you want them to perform in that area, and they'll often, if you were programming a day of walkabouts, you'd probably program 2 or 3 slots for them for that day. So they'd go out, they'd do their 15-20 minutes mid-morning, have a break, then come back and do another slot, maybe around lunchtime, have a break, then come back and do another slot. So on bigger programming things, I often use walkabouts as we talk about it as being the glue. So we might have some big performance work that might be static, again, all outdoor work. And if we're wanting stuff in between where audiences may travel to, the walkabout's a nice glue. So as people are meandering on their journey, they've got some things to interact with that are often cheaper than big static work, because you're not involving sets, you're not involving multiple layers, but it gives a nice additionality to it. But there are lots of places that will program walkabout just on its own for what it is, and get really brilliant responses for it.
Are there, while we're on this topic, as a follow-on question from that, David, are there, as in your role, are there kind of types of work that you would describe? So is walkabout one, and are there a number of other types of work you would classify, or does it not work like that?
It's walkabout very definitely is. It's kind of its own thing, and saying it comes from that history of street theatre and street performances and individual performers in small groups. Other work, we'll talk about maybe participation-based work, and that's maybe where an audience or a community cast is involved in the actual performance as opposed to just watching it. You then get a bit of a blur with some stuff where the audience may end up being involved in the show, but that's not the intention from the outset. So they've not been part of the rehearsal process, they're not in it, but it's the way that narrative develops. So some really amazing companies that work that way in terms of being able to manipulate and work with an audience, and the audience come into that work depending on what level they feel comfortable with. So there's an amazing company called Kamchatka, who are definitely worth looking up. European company who just the way they engage with place, and I've seen them stop traffic, I've seen them stand in front of buses, and it's now that sort of way you probably wouldn't program them the first thing you've done, because the level of trust you need to build not only with your audience, but in terms of your local authority. And if you're working with those local authorities saying, yeah, we want, there's going to be this group of Spanish performers wandering around the city stopping traffic, if you've not built that trust with you as an event organizer and been clear about what you're trying to do, that could be an instant, health and safety, there's no way we're doing that here. But if you build to it and say, all of the companies that we work with and those types of work, they're experts at doing this. It's what they do day in, day out. So they're actually, the level of safety that goes into their performances is huge, but there's just a way of them engaging with people that's really beautiful.
Okay, let me ask another couple of questions before we move on to talk about audience. So let me just, a really basic one, and forgive me if it's too basic. What are you actually buying when you purchase a performance or performer? What is it that you're purchasing? Is it a number of shows? How does it work?
It's a really good question. Again, it varies. So in the simplest form, you are buying a performance. So the walkabout, you would be paying an amount for that you would agree with that artist. They will have a price list, and you will be buying 2, 3, 4, however many performances on that given day. You more than likely pay just a fee for that, a set amount. Sometimes that might include their travel and accommodation. So if they're based in Cornwall and you're in Newcastle and you want them to perform at 9 o'clock the next morning, then you're probably going to pay for a hotel the night before, and you'll probably pay their travel. Some companies will build that into their fee, so you're just paying a slightly higher fee and it's all woven in. Other companies will say, this is our performance fee, and then it's accommodation on top, travel on top. Some will have what's called a rider, and again, forgive me if that's very basic, but rider is a list of things that they require. So around kind of, it might be an empty space that they can have for theirs to get changed in. It may be water, tea and coffee facilities. Some may ask for food, and that's all debatable. With all of this, with any kind of negotiation transaction, you can say no. they could ask for something completely ridiculous, like, well, we're doing one performance, but we want you to feed you at the nicest restaurant in your town. And you may notice that, no, that doesn't fit like that. But it's often with outdoor arts, you would expect an element of some form of, basic at the minimum catering in terms of tea, coffee, those sorts of things that people can access. So that often comes in the rider. So you'll get all of those costs in, and that's what you're paying for. If it's a bigger performance piece and has been maybe made by a company, you're paying again for that performance, but things like rights within that, things like paying the people that have made it, that's all woven into that fee. So again, you would be buying a performance or a number of performances. And then the other element to that is then commissioning work, and that's where you go to an artist or a company and you say, we want you to make something new and bespoke for us, for our place, and you're then instigating that work being made, and you'll pay a lot more for that because the time involved and it's new ideas is more expensive than something off the shelf. So if I was starting with kind of outdoor arts programming, I probably wouldn't start with commissioning. I think that's something where you really understand your audience and the job that you want that work to do, and the sector. But they're the sort of three kind of main sort of financial areas you might look at in terms of engaging companies to come and perform.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate this. Now, can we move on to talk about audiences and marketing? Audiences, you've hinted at it already, but I've been kind of saving it for this section. Audiences are a bit different for outdoor arts, aren't they? In terms of, in this sector, people talk about profile of audiences, but the audience is quite different for outdoor arts, isn't it? Would you say something about that, David?
Yeah, it's one of the things I love the most about it. And, and my background was in theatre. And I had the privilege of working for some amazing organisations and in some amazing buildings. But I personally always felt that at times the building itself and what it represented was a barrier, and that always felt that more people could enjoy the work if we could get them there and get past that barrier of it's theatre, it's not for me. And outdoor arts, you've just got this freedom that kind of it strips away, as I mentioned earlier, those barriers. So you can engage with everybody and anybody, if they want to. And I think there's some of my career highlights have been kind of seeing the faces of audiences reacting to work that you've kind of brought into that place. That look of surprise, of wonder, of amazement, and they're true. It's hard to kind of hide those elements. So a story, we programmed Light Night this year as our first festival in Worcester, and we put some giant light up seesaws from a Canadian company on Cathedral Square. The piece of work's a big international piece of work. It had been in New York, it had done Durham Lumiere, so the artists were a real high standing and it was high quality work. But when you see it, it is 8 or 12 light up seesaws that you as an audience come and play on. And that played for me around that sense of kind of play and kind of disrupting the normal pattern of what you would find in that square. It's giving people permission to kind of play and enjoy a space in a different way. And one of the stories we were told was of from one of our volunteers who'd been stationed on where the seesaws were, that there was a lady that phoned her friend at kind of sort of 10 to 9 at night saying, you need to get down here now with the kids, and this is incredible. And the lady turned up with her family, with her kids in their pajamas. She'd got them out of bed. They'd got on a bus to come to Cathedral Square and play on the seesaws. And they played on the seesaws for 15, 20 minutes. They had a great time. And then they went home and went back to bed. And it's that sort of thing that actually, it was really amazing work. And the concept of the work and the artistic integrity behind it was at the very top level. But it's presented in a way that's so democratic that anybody can choose to engage and take enjoyment from that work and how that fits, and that for me is something that feels very unique to our sector, and where the audience plays such a huge part in that. The relationship between performer and work, you're so close in those spaces in terms of outdoor space, and the environment affects it in terms of, the weather can affect it. You feel kind of bonded with that audience that, we've been through this together. So you've seen shows in torrential rain, you've seen, baking heat, and you feel you've had that sort of shared moment that you remove that fourth wall. And when you have work that speaks directly to an audience, and that audience is is active in that engagement. I think it's really, really powerful.
It does sound like, if people want to start going down this road, members of our audience, that has the potential for kind of great power, really, in terms of reaching people. And like you say, it's got a great democratizing function. But would you say something about building relationships with an audience over a period of time? So I know that's something festival organisers and event organisers often talk about. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's language is really important, and I think from the off, it's kind of getting rid of some of the jargon and some of the language that we might try and intellectualize work over, and saying what it is. I found with outdoor work, audiences, particularly if they happen upon it, if they've not pre-booked, they want to know. You'll get asked, kids on their BMXs to old age pensioners going, what is it? And you need to be able to really clearly answer what it is. That they're not bothered who the composer is. They're not bothered that it was premiered in Montreal 4 years ago. They go, what is it? And you'll get asked questions, and why are they doing that? Why? What for? What's going to happen? And so therefore having that language and having, brilliantly briefed volunteers, and it's for me, it's why outdoor arts volunteers are so important, because again, they are normal everyday people. So therefore having that conversation on your behalf as the festival about the work, and then being well briefed about the work is so important, because they'll say, oh, they're a company from Bristol and they're circus performers and this is going to happen, and they give a sense of it. But they're not talking about, they're not restaurant critics. They're not writing a critical review of the work, because people don't talk like that. People say, I really liked it because this happened, or when that person stood on that person's head and then jumped off, that was amazing. That's the language we use. So let's not try and make it any more than that. And it makes it kind of really accessible. So building that narrative of being able to talk about the work in really simple terms, without, and that's not about kind of, understating it or saying people aren't smart enough to understand what you're talking about. It's about going, you don't need to use that language. Tell them what it is. What do that audience need to know to engage with that work? Or can you give them the signpost that if they want to find out more, that I really like that company, who were they, that there's something handed out at the end of the signage where they perform, where they can go, I can go and find that out. So if they want to find out more, they can. But I think that breaking down those barriers to talk about what to experience, a really simple thing, saying you will turn up here at 7 o'clock, there won't be any seating, there won't be this, you will then do this will then happen, and talking to it, particularly if you're new to it, talking through that journey. And again, if you can do it on your social media, you do it on your Facebook, you do it on your Eventbrite, or your own organisation's website. You can talk through what is going to happen and what to expect. People often feel nervous about engaging with something if they don't understand it, in terms of what's going to happen, and also if they don't feel they've been given information. So if you say, we're putting on this festival and there are going to be loads of companies performing, and they turn up and there's only 2, then you will get criticism from the public going, you said there were loads and there was only 2. So again, you have to be really honest. Whereas if you said there's going to be these 2 amazing works happening in town next Wednesday night from these leading artists, and this is what it will look like, and one will be here and one will be here, no one's going to email you and say, you said there were loads, because you've been really honest about what the transaction is. So again, that clarity of what the thing is with your audience is really key. And then audiences, certainly from a festival point of view, they build loyalty and trust. So if they've come to something that you produced, they enjoyed it, they like the quality of the work, they will then look out for that, and they will identify that you tend to find more festival and place loyalty rather than necessarily company. So people, yes, will follow certain companies or certain performers to different towns, but on the whole they go, oh, that's happening there again, it's the same people that organised that, we'll go back for that because the last thing we went to was really good, or it was different. So building that loyalty, and you can stretch them. You can program really challenging work that might be around political issues or what's happening in the world today. You can program really harrowing work. You can kind of, audiences are smart, and over time you can build up where you want to take them. You can program work that might make people cross, might make people frustrated. If that's your intention, back to that sort of earlier artistic intention, bit we talked about, if that's your intention, then great. For me as a programmer, there's nothing worse than an audience coming away from something saying it was okay, because that okay just kind of doesn't really do anything. I'd rather somebody come and feel moved, or that the subject made them cross, or that they were disappointed, that's happening in the world. You want them to feel something, as we said, and that might be really small, but you want to try and avoid okay. So you can build that relationship with that audience, but it's being ready to respond to the casual audience as well. So you may get somebody that knows your festival happens that week every year. They always come, they come to everything, they love it, and they've been coming for 10 years and they're friends of the organisation, and you've built that up. But you don't want to just focus on your narrative of talking to them because they sign up to the newsletter and they're engaged with you on social media. You want the 12-year-old on his BMX with his mates who cycles past and stops and says, "What's this?" You've got an opportunity there and then to kind of engage. And that's where I say briefings of volunteers and people want to start going, well, what's this all about? We did a project in Barnsley some years ago, and 4 different performances. And I remember watching a lady was watching it. The first one, she was saying to her mate, in Broad Yorkshire, which I won't insult anybody by trying to do myself. Accents aren't my forte. Was sort of, what's this and why is it happening? Quite dismissive. It's like, what's the point? And she stayed for the whole show. It was about 25 minutes. And then I saw her back for the second show with 4 more people. And then she was there for the third show and there was 10 of them. And that sort of sense of kind of like, she'd just been out in the town doing her shopping, decided to stop, then is, on the phone to her mates, texting her, come and see this. And from that moment of, why is this happening? This is rubbish. To then going, this is really good. I want to tell people about it. Can we keep it going? I think, again, with outdoor arts and festival work, that immediacy of kind of spreading that message via social media, via Instagram, that you can build an energy where people kind of get sucked in. And like the family I was talking about for Light Night with the seesaws, they weren't going to come. They didn't even know about it. But somebody has been enthusiastic enough where they've got them out of their beds, got on a bus and come in to engage with a piece of work because it's now and in that moment. And that was just one night. It was gone the next day. So you don't want to miss that moment. It's not a 2-week or a 6-week play run. You've got that moment of here and now, and then it's gone. And that can be infectious for kind of people.
That's that fantastic insight into building that relationship and getting the audience to kind of trust you, but also trying to find new people who just stumble upon it and then they become advocates. Absolutely fascinating. So let's move on to some questions about the actual production itself. So we've talked a lot about the artist having an artistic vision. We've talked about how you might think about your audience and also where you might source the work. But okay, let's assume the day itself has arrived. Now, we're not in a building where a lot of all the variables are controlled. Things can go wrong, can't they? So could you tell us a little bit about what are the things that we should look out for on the day?
Yeah, it's, again, if you can imagine it, it will happen. So, and it's about having, there's numerous factors. It's about working with people who are really good. So that includes the artists and the companies that that they can work that way. Again, if they've come via recommended sources, agencies, Outdoor Arts UK directory, they're used to performing in that way and they're adaptable. And it's that thing you just said, Michael, about needing to remain adaptable. So you may have something scheduled for 10 o'clock and it's a walkabout performance and the mother of all thunderstorms happens at 5 to 10. So you may say, we're going to delay it till 20 past. And by 20 past, the weather's cleared and you can go out. Now, in a venue, having been in venues, delaying something or something not starting on time is seen as a big no-no. And whereas in our sector, you get used to adapting that. It's about how do you communicate that to the audience if they've arrived. You obviously try and avoid that, but you are acknowledging, certainly in this country, in the UK, weather plays a big part. And so you might need to adapt. You might need to move it at the last minute. So it might have been, it was all going to be outside again for walkabout. We can't do that. So actually, can we put it inside? Is there a space? Can we get it into the shopping centre? And that's where those, which I think we'll talk about later, those wider stakeholder relationships. So you can pick up the phone to the shopping centre manager going, could we bring this into your foyer instead? And that adaptability, it's about having people around you, either in your own organisation or within the artist community that are used to that. So good event managers, good production managers, who are used to responding to things off the cuff and kind of fixing things so things can happen. Occasionally, you will always get things, that are out of your remit. So, I've had projects where, you suddenly find there's nesting swans in a car park. And they weren't there 2 days ago, and now you can't put an audience there, and you've got to adapt to that. And you can't, you're always trying to avoid the let's cancel it, let's not do it, because that's the end point. But you're walking back going, okay, do we change the venue, or can we perform in half of it, or what would this look like? So there will always, even in the best event plans going forward, there will always be stuff that you just weren't anticipating. And it's about having the right people around to very quickly make those decisions and can go, is it safe? And particularly a lot of themes this week in our symposium around, post-COVID events. How do we keep audiences safe? How do we give audiences confidence that we're being safe? And making those decisions that we can adapt. So there are all sorts of variables. So the weather is a huge one for outdoor arts, and being prepared with your audience and with the people you work with, that sometimes you do have to cancel things. Sometimes you do have to stop an event midway through because the surface is now so wet it's not safe for the circus performers, and therefore their safety is paramount. So you kind of have to go, right, we're going to cancel this, but there's another show at 2:00, or you go, can we restart? And and it becomes the companies and the artists will be well used to working that way, because we work in the UK, we're used to having to adapt to that. So I think it requires a degree of flexibility that maybe doesn't happen in venue-based work, where you're booking a certain thing at a certain time, and as you said, you can control all the variables. We're trying to put stuff in spaces where you've got very little control over certain elements and how you go about that. But I think that performer safety and artist safety and audience safety are kind of always at the paramount of your thinking. And it's where working with good production managers, event managers, even if you're a small organization, you may have an idea of the things you might want to program. You could find that work. If I had a little bit of extra budget and that was me, I'd be investing in a project manager or an event manager to help me through those other bits, because the work, it's easier to find that. Those people that have those skills to help you realize that is invaluable.
And those people are freelance. We can find them and hire them.
Yeah, brilliant. And there's numerous of them that work freelance, so they'll have a portfolio, they'll work on other events, and it may be people that are developing that practice in your area. So they may organise other small events, they might organise markets or be part of a committee that organise something else. But I think bringing, say, somebody in for a short period of time to manage a specific event, if it's not your forte, I'd recommend that, because it just saves you a whole host of sort of headaches. Finding the work is a lot easier than, say, and again, it fits around the complexity of it. If you're just doing some walkabout, you could probably just kind of arrange that through yourself and manage that. If budget is an issue about bringing in additional staffing. If you're trying to do something more complex, and if you're trying to create a festival and it's a multi-day event, then I'd absolutely say that's got to be the first line on your budget, because they're a good producer, project manager, event manager will save you so many problems down the way.
That's really, really helpful little extra tip there. I really like it. Can I ask a naughty question, which is, what's the most challenging situation you've experienced on the day? If you would share one and tell us what you did to overcome it, if you did. Would you mind sharing some? I just think it's really insightful.
There's loads, and you get to a point. I think earlier in my career, they carry more fear, because that's huge. So I'd say probably the scariest was around. We had a large performance piece of work to mark the Rugby Union World Cup coming to the UK back in 2015. We'd commissioned an outdoor performance company to work with some local participants. Company we commissioned were called Tangled Feet. They're a brilliant kind of outdoor arts company. Worked all over the UK and internationally. And half an hour before the show, the site electrician, who wasn't the electrician from the company side, said, I'm not sure this paper works as I want it to be. And that's half an hour before we'd got 3,500 people as an audience on Millennium Square, and a show that had been worked on for 3-4 weeks. And there was a moment there going, if we don't have this right bit of paper, it can't go ahead. So at that point, you need those people with clear heads around you, your problem solvers. So instead of that being, well, they haven't done that, or why haven't they done that, it'd been because the way that project had worked, that you'd got the council's official electrician and you'd got the company's electrician, and the bit of paperwork wasn't basically in the same language, yet the work had been done. So we knew it was safe. It was just around an area being missed. So we then had to commission on the spot the site electrician to authorise that the electrics were safe, which cost us an extra 200 quid, which in that moment, and that's where me saying to my staff in that situation, what are our options? What is, so if we don't pay this, what is the result? Well, the result is that the show can't happen, or it could, but if anything went wrong, we'd be legally responsible. So at that point, you need to keep your performers away from that. You keep everybody away from that. You go, right, this is the small group of people making that decision. What do we need? And you make the decision. And nobody was any the wiser. And still to this day, there was probably only 4 people involved in that conversation. And sometimes you get those things that crop up that you with outdoor arts, you think all the work's been done and you think everyone thinks where it needs to be, but suddenly there'll be this authority there didn't fit that in, which is where I think we'll talk about shortly, is around those relationships with the local authority. If you're not the local authority already, is absolutely critical in terms of, so when things do pop up and need a quick fix, it's not going to take weeks and weeks, and there's nobody in the office past kind of a certain time each day. So that's probably one of the scariest. But putting people up cranes when it's torrential rain, and it's always those bits of the what if. So if the weather stays like this, we might be in a problem. If the weather gets worse, what might we need to do? And you're constantly running through those things going, okay, so we're maybe not there yet, but it's something we've got to keep an eye on. Where might that go? Can we do that? Which is where, again, having good people with you is easy. You don't tend to get those situations with walkabout stuff, let's say, because that is smaller and easy way. That was quite a big project with a lot of people involved and a high profile. But it was probably, and that's probably why it was scary for me in terms of not the issue around the safety, was okay, so if we cancel this now, there's quite a lot of eyes on this.
It's really interesting. So having a cool head is as important as having a really good artistic vision if you're going into, or somebody on your team with a cool head, because there's so many variables, so many things can change. It's okay, really interesting. One extra sort of addendum question in this section, and we'll move on to the next section, which was, so how do you get the best out of the performers and the artists on the day?
Look, yeah, it's a great question. It's a really lovely question. I think for me, it's about taking care of them. And I think it's, so you don't see, say, for instance, Apple skimping on their packaging. Your new Apple phone or laptop arrives, and and the box is lovely. Even that little moment when you lift the lid off and it makes that noise, you're just like, this is brilliant. And you just get involved in that. And they've not spent, millions of pounds developing this technology to then kind of like throw it in some random box and kind of give it to you. So it's that, for me, it's always, but why would you book an artist to perform and then not give that artist every possible thing to make that performance the best it can be? So it's those little things that sort of, and we use it a lot in our team, and you'll get it a lot on festivals, the way you've got somebody who is a designated artist liaison person, and their job is just to basically make sure the artists are okay in terms of, are they being met at the train station? There's nothing worse than turning up in a place you've never been before. You don't know, you arrive at the station and there's nobody there. Just a simple thing like somebody there to meet you and being like, hi, how are you? How was your journey? Do you want a coffee? Those sorts of little personal bits instantly. If you're accompanying an artist and you're met by somebody and they're offering to, grab you a coffee, and they've got their car to drive you somewhere or a taxi lined up, instantly your mindset to what's to come focuses purely on that, and you relax and you go, this is going to be okay. because we're going to be well looked after. If you turn up and there's nobody there, and you ring and nobody answers, instantly you're trying to problem solve. And I think a lot, again, with outdoor arts, you often don't have big crews of management with people. Sometimes you will just get the artist. So if they're trying to deal with, I don't know where we're meant to be and what's happening about this and what are the timings, all of that can sort of get lost. So that making artists feel wanted, simple things, thanking them, is kind of really good. I'll make sure as festivals director for what we do is that, I'll make sure I talk to all our artists, and you may be busy at various bits, but just kind of having that, thank you for coming, appreciate that. Yes, you're paying them, and yes, they're delivering a service, but no one ever kind of underperformed because somebody said thank you to them. And being excited about them being there, because that's infectious. If I'm talking to some artists who are going to perform for us, if I'm going, this is brilliant, we're really excited, there's loads of people who attended, the first 2 days have gone really well, lots of interest on social media about you and your work, that says that artist, that it then bigs them. It's like the kind of like pre-match team talk. It's that kind of like, you build them up and they're like, great, we're somewhere they want us to be, we've been well looked after. You'll go as far with some things that, you might create little goodie bags that you give them to remember. One of the things around that is that these artists will travel the UK all the time. So as much as you're mining information on them, they're doing it the other way around. So artists will go, don't go there, it was a nightmare. We had a really bad time there. Payment was late. We weren't looked after. They can't see you. And so artists will go, actually, don't go to that space. You're not well looked after. Whereas the ones that are looked after, like good artists, people will remember again, they were brilliant. They were so nice. They were really accommodating. We felt really looked after. Because the danger is, again, these people are coming to you for one day. They're going to maybe perform 3 times a day for 15 minutes. You go, actually, I haven't got the time to do that. Or it's only 15 minutes. And the difference that can make is huge in terms of those artists feeling say wanted and valued, and you then just get a better performance out of them. So for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer not to invest the time in that dialogue.
That's really, really helpful, I think. And I imagine for them, they want to connect with the place. Of course they do, connect with the people place. So that leads us on to our next sort of section, really, which is a shorter section, but it's about planning and preparation. Now, we've had a number of sessions already in Tomorrow Today, including a session yesterday with the local government officers. But I'd just ask you, really, if you could give us some insight about what have you learned about planning and preparation for outdoor arts events in your time doing this work?
Yeah, it's. I think relationships would be the one thing that I think is absolutely paramount, and it's building those relationships with other people that are going to enable you to do what you're wanting to try and achieve. So for us as a festivals team within Severn Arts, our relationship with the local authority and is really important. So when we're even at this stage of thinking of doing things, we're letting them know what we're thinking of doing, so they can comment and they can go, well, okay, yeah, that sounds great, or we're not quite sure about that. And then when it does land as either, a license permission or something, they know it's coming, and it's down to those individual relationships. So good example is Bex, who's the producer on our team, has got a really good relationship with the guy that's head of highways at Worcester Council, because we need to have that dialogue, and because we invest time in having that conversation when we need to ring up and say, oh, there's suddenly some bollards there, can we move them? Or we're thinking of closing this street next January for 24 hours. How does that sound? Right. You get a sense of that before you get to that stage of putting in the application that then feels cold. And then they may reject it because they don't know who you are or there's no context. So investing in those relationships, I think, is critical. Again, outdoor arts is so varied. So is it a weekend festival? Are you on a green site? Are you in a city centre every number of days? So kind of everything I'm saying is within that huge, great span of what could be classed as outdoor arts. But if you were in towns and city centres, more urban areas, the relationships with shops and traders is critical. So just as simple as going and telling them what you've got planned. They may have a really busy day as a result of that, so they might want to put more staff on. If you're bringing 2,500 plus extra people into the city, they may need extra staff. They may decide they want to open a bit later because it'll be worth their while. But if they've been involved and you've let them know it's happening and you listen to their concerns, they again are invested, so you don't get a backlash afterwards where they come in and go, too many people outside our shop, or actually all of the stuff was at the other end of town and it meant the rest of town was dead all day, so it didn't help us in terms of footfall numbers. I think as we are all very mindful about trying to support high streets and the economy to kind of come back to life, outdoor events can play a huge part in kind of helping that, but also if kind of done badly or placed in the wrong place, can also be kind of detrimental. And with where shops are at the minute, they're not going to take too kindly to losing business. If you've got food traders, can they do outside offers? Could the local shops that you're around you, are they the food offer? So by having whatever you're doing, whether it's a festival or a one-day event, you're showing to them that actually outside of the artistic bit, this is good for business. And what you want is a place to feel that you being there and doing what you're trying to do is of benefit. It's worthwhile doing it. And therefore, even if they don't know what it is, they may never go, it might not be to their taste. They go, oh, it's a really good thing we have this, because actually my profits go up 20%, or actually it gives us profile, for the city that we wouldn't, or the town we wouldn't normally get. So it's a really good thing. Down to, in small market towns I've worked in, where you might get the local restaurant doing a certain meal deal that night, and they go, actually that worked for us. So it's building those relationships which all come into your planning. That's outside of all of your health and safety planning, your risk assessment. And as you said, we've heard a great deal over the last day and a half from some really brilliant speakers on Tomorrow Today around how we think that's going to change and what we need to be considering. And again, for me, it's that having people that really understand that work and where to pull that together is key, and having the resources around that. And one of the things that came out some of the conversations yesterday was around saying, don't be afraid to go, oh, we're not going to do that because we can't. So it's about being realistic. And if we've got this much space and this much budget, we're going to start here. We'd love to build to there, but actually we've realised that, half of the budget needs to go on fencing or on queuing barriers. So therefore, actually, we're not going to do that now. And I think, being kind of building things up slowly. Some of the best festivals I know and outdoor events I know are ones that have slowly built over time, and they keep doing things and they add a new layer and they add a new layer, and they've got buy-in from the place on all sorts of levels, and they bring tourists in, and it's just sustainable. Whereas some of you that are huge instantly, and it can cause such a tidal wave of sort of that didn't necessarily work, and then what after. So taking the place on that sort of journey with you is really important.
That's really interesting, because you're starting to talk about moving beyond thinking just about an audience and thinking about a place, and also thinking about a long-term relationship and a long-term vision for what you want to do, which is fascinating. And we'll be talking more about that tomorrow in the sessions tomorrow. So we've got about 5 minutes before we start taking some questions from the audience. And I just want to try and say something interesting about the financial decisions, really, David. I'll just ask you one question, which is, how do you approach the financial kind of dimension of programming outdoor arts?
Yeah, it's a really varied model. A lot, not all, but a lot of outdoor arts, and certainly walkabout work, you don't tend to charge a ticket price for, and for me personally, I like the fact that a lot of our work is free to access. It breaks down some of those access barriers, so you are reliant then on either finding funding or having it in your budget to animate a space, or kind of having that money there. The deals tend to be quite straightforward, and when we say deals, that's like what you're paying the artist. So you go, I'm paying you 500 quid, or I'm paying you £5,000, depending on what it is, and you know those costs, and your event costs. So you might have that within your budget. Is it within your tourism budget, or is it in, you'll often see in outdoor arts, again, particularly around walkabout stuff, that, some places will use their marketing budget for that, because actually it's a way of marketing what we do. It's a way of bringing new customers into the place or the business. So we've got a little bit of money for marketing the organisation or our product that isn't performance, that we could use to animate those spaces. Bits and bobs of funding, and we know we're in a really strange time with funding currently because of kind of COVID. But again, looking at the Arts Council, and I think we're going to share some resources later about where you could look for funding. again, it's scalable. You can book some walkabout performers for a couple of £100. You can spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on outdoor work. So again, it's kind of sort of seeing where your budget fits within the market. But there are pots of money available. There are going to be more pots coming online, I think, to particularly around communities we anticipate, and particularly around health and well-being, as we connect more with that being important. So is it that actually by you staging this work, you are helping a place feel better about itself, or feeling that that sense of civic pride or connection, or you're working in a certain community? There may well be some funding available to enable you to do that. So it's really varied, but say you don't tend to, it doesn't tend to work the way that a venue would, where you've got a box office income, so your targets on that, and therefore you're looking at, is it a break-even point, or where does it fit? It tends to be much more, you've got the funding in place to deliver things. You might charge for certain things, and there will be some bigger outdoor events that are charging a ticket price, but on the whole you see a lot more where it is free to access, or is it on a donation basis, or people choosing to support what you're doing, and being if you support us, we can do this again next year. So it becomes more voluntary, but because it's so broad, you cover all those ends, but there's a lot more around those finances, that it isn't reliant on a box office income and selling an amount of tickets, particularly a starting point, to kind of make it financially viable.
That's really helpful. That's really, really helpful. So I think now, David, now we've kind of mined your brain for all these useful things. I'm going to see if there's hopefully some questions from the audience.
Great.
And we've got an anonymous one here. So how do you see outdoor arts changing in a COVID world, especially in relation to people gathering to watch performances, limiting the touch points, interactive installations and so on? How do things change? How do you see things changing?
I think it's an evolving picture, and I think we're going to continue to move on that. I think artists and people that work in this sector are really brilliant problem solvers. It's interesting that a number of people that work behind the scenes on festivals and outdoor arts have been pulled in to deliver various bits of COVID stuff. So in terms of heading up building Nightingale hospitals, and they are very practically minded. And I think the session we had this morning with the event managers was great, because it shows that level of they enjoy those challenges. They see problem solving as being like, how do we make that happen? So I think it's inevitable that things are going to change, certainly in the shorter term. Is that the next 12 months? We do need to be thinking of all those things we think about in terms of sort of COVID and its impact on audiences. So do we have to have different queuing systems? Do we have to limit numbers? Do we have to how do we sanitize? All of those things are things we need to think of, and it's better at this stage to be kind of working towards that worst case scenario, and then going, oh well, we can rein back on that, we don't need to follow that restriction. So it will be, it suits outdoor arts in that sense that we're used to, as we were just saying, being adaptable and used to having to kind of change. And I think communicating that with our audiences and our public is going to be really key. I think it's going to be really key that we again, as highlighted this morning, that if you are just putting some walkabout work in a place, that actually people can choose not to be involved in that, and they've got the space to kind of not have that happen to them. That it needs to be, say, there's a real kind of split, isn't there, at the minute, in terms of society, people who are desperate to get back to things, feel very comfortable and very safe, and those that still feel that they don't want to engage in that. So it's about you as an organizer, being mindful of that, and kind of making sure your work fits that. I think outdoor arts work is happening, and we will still see it continue to happen, but I think it will feel different, and trying to compare what was pre-COVID to now probably isn't helpful. It's more about, okay, what might that look like going forward, and how might we do that, and how do we limit numbers, how do we limit touch points? There's already some amazing kind of technological advantages around, how do we do ticketing, how do we do sign up, how do we do those things in a way that can work within restrictions as they are currently. And we're used to biblical storms. Galway's programme was massively affected at the start of the year due to the huge storms we had, and they had to cancel events. So there may be, if there's a local lockdown, we have to cancel events. That still fits in with the nature of what we do. We always try to avoid cancelling. It's the last possible thing, but ultimately people's safety, artist or audience, always comes first.
This is fantastic answers, and we've got lots of questions. So let's try and answer as many of them as we can. This is a really good one, and it builds on something we talked about earlier. How do you strike a balance between challenging a community to experience something with things that might make them feel a bit out of their comfort zone, while still satisfying your traditional audience, your demographic audience? This is from Geraldine Gibbons, by the way. Sorry, I should have added.
Great question. It's a real balance. I think it's about knowing that audience and also knowing what you want to do. So if your intention is to challenge an audience, you might put a certain piece of outdoor work in a certain part of a city that you think might be challenging, or a certain demographic of the public that you think might be challenging. If your intention is to challenge them, then that's great. It's when you accidentally end up challenging people that you didn't intend is where you can kind of get a little bit more problematic. So it is, as Geraldine said, it is about balance. Is that audience, is that place ready for that? How will you handle that? How will you handle feedback that might be perceived as negative because you've challenged them? So have you been commissioned by a local authority to put something on, and you come in and program something that for that place is quite radical and controversial, and then there's a bit of a backlash, and there are certain festivals and certain events where that's right to do, and they will deliberately go, we want to really be pushing some boundaries with this because that's what we need right now. And the kickback is, the local authority go, we didn't know it was going to be that. And so you can get into a real minefield. So it's about everybody being really clear on what your intentions are. And depending on what the subject matter is, or is engaging with the community, talking to the community, we feel you really need this. And, I know there's a really interesting piece of work that Helen Marriage, who's one of our keynotes tomorrow from our show, is going to talk about the Burning Man project they did in Northern Ireland, and the impact that had politically on a community, but how that community came on board and really bought into it. And it was about that, having that dialogue again. So it's, and knowing that, not everything is going to be for everybody. So that's okay. I think having that encouraging conversation. So again, that's where volunteers are really good, in terms of people afterwards going, I love that, it was brilliant, or going, oh, well, that wasn't really for me, or you mine all that feedback, and you come back and you look at it when we reflect on things we've programmed. It's like, did it work? Well, what do we mean by did it work? In terms of what was our intention, and did we meet it? And if that is that we were trying to do something that was a bit more of a stretch, that's okay. And was it too much of a stretch? We talk a lot around volume levels, so that's why I'm going, actually that was too high, we've got to turn that down a little bit to get to that point. So rather than starting at full volume and go, right, we've gone right out there and we've been really bold, but we alienated everybody, we've not taken them on that journey. It's like, right, we've got to turn that down a bit to then build that to a point where we can start to kind of go, yeah, let's tweak that, let's push that a little bit further. And it's it's around, what are your intentions? Are you trying to be controversial? Are you trying to make a statement? What is it as you as the programmer? And being clear, again, it comes back to knowing what you're programming. So the danger of going, you've not read the details, somebody's mentioned a company, you've gone, yeah, they sound great, and they turn up with something that's hugely political. And you're like, oh, I didn't know it was going to be that. And you're in the firing line for the backlash. So it's knowing the work and having had the conversation with the companies and the artists about, what it is they're wanting to say, and that you're all really clear on that.
It's brilliant. These are really great answers. And we've got more questions. I'm going to jump to one that's kind of like a really nice, straightforward one, actually.
Okay. How
long in advance do I need to think about booking outdoor artists?
Yeah, great question. It's varied at the minute, and I suppose there's a pre-COVID and a current answer. So pre-COVID, if you wanted to book a walkabout artist for this weekend, you could probably get one. So it's kind of, it's Wednesday, okay. Depending on the level of permissions you need, and depending on scale, all of those sorts of things. So, finding them, are they available? So it can be incredibly short. Other things that require more of the processes we've talked about this afternoon, in terms of health and safety, and has it got to go through certain committees within a local authority? Are there certain numbers of audience? Is it going to take a certain amount of time to build that? Your then marketing, becomes a lot longer. So we, for artist festivals at Severn Arts, we're currently programming next year now. So next summer, we're working on quite hard. we also are hoping to deliver Light Night in January, and the conversations with the artists we wanting to program for that are at quite a detailed stage, but they're quite large scale events, so we work that far. So again, it's down to sort of scale. With COVID in mind, some of the things that's coming around over the last 2 days is just allowing more time, because we are coming up with new processes and things we weren't aware of before that we now need to factor in. So the caveat I'd add would be now is to kind of, the more leading time you can give yourself, the better. But I think sort of anywhere in between there.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then another one is was around talking about quality. What are the signs to look out for that that a piece of work might be bad quality and maybe to be avoided?
That's a great question. So again, where have you got it from? As in, where did you hear about this work? Where have you found it? Is it Magical Joe's Circus on Facebook? Now, instantly I'd be like, hang on a minute, where else have you been? Where does that fit? Are you only advertising on Facebook? When was the last time you did any performances? Very fairly quickly you can get a sort of sense of that. Also, where possible, we're kind of obsessed, now in terms of kind of with email. That's the way we work because it's quick and efficient. Although, during lockdown, we've all become aficionados of Zoom, but that having a face-to-face conversation with somebody or on the phone about their work. And again, artists, they want you to book them. So therefore they're not going to be irritated or frustrated at you ringing them to ask some questions before you book them. And you can fairly quickly ascertain that, are they the real deal, that actually you're on the circuit, you're doing various other things, you're well established, great, I feel really confident, as opposed to, well, I did something 2 years ago, you're like, well, why has there been such a gap? Has it gone elsewhere? And you start to just get, I massively rely on gut feeling. You just get a feel about things that you talk to people and you feel, I feel comfortable about this. And with a little bit of research on, YouTube, on the great thing about outdoor arts as well is that just how interactive it is with social media. So, you can search companies in Twitter, on Facebook, and you'll find previous performances, you'll find them tagged into other things. You can kind of fairly quickly from just your laptop or your desktop kind of mine a wealth of information. And I think anything that starts to raise alarm bells, question. And if they have got places they've been, get in touch with them. If people contact us and say, you programmed company X, how was it? We'll have those conversations and say, this worked like this. I'd be mindful of this, because sometimes it's not a don't program them or do. Sometimes it's they were great. This needed quite a lot of support. So just be mindful that actually that needed quite a lot of input. So when you're factoring in, can we do it? You've got that in your head. So again, the sector in terms of festivals and venues, outdoor venues, are brilliant at happily sharing that sort of data. Okay,
we've got a really interesting one here. Someone's asked, stilts and fire acts seem good ideas to program now in a COVID world. I don't know whether that's because fire can burn off COVID. I don't know. But stilts are high up and fire needs distance. What other distance acts could you suggest looking at?
Anything in a bubble. So there's a really great act that Fool's Paradise have that is snow people inside a snow globe. So that's brilliant. On a serious note, I think we are looking at that. So when we've looked at things about, walkabout stuff, as I talked earlier about the glue for our events, when we're back with live performers, it's going, okay, well, if someone's on stilts, that's an instant distance. And how do we do that? And looking at those bits, and you go fire, well, on a health and safety ground, we're going to need some space between that anyway. So, on that sort of question, they're practical things that might frame your thinking around that. And you might see artists coming up with new things because artists are the most inventive, creative people you'll meet. So they will already be thinking, how do I change what I do to now fit in this new space? So what do I need to think about? Distance from people. So how can I do that? Oh, everybody's wearing masks, right? So we're going to see an influx of mask-based work on Walkabout over the next 12 months as people adapt to that and go, oh, that's become quite interesting. And actually, what's the most extreme version of a mask we can do? And they will be developing those things now. So looking at those sorts of bits where you go, we can still do stuff, but actually it fits within that social distancing bubble. It's not the show where random acts of kindness where, somebody's going and hugging everybody. Well, that act's probably not going to get a lot of bookings in the next 12 months. Whereas, the stilt walkers and the people in snow globes, actually that feels safe, not only from an organisational point of view, but as an audience, you go, yeah, they're inside there. I don't need to interact with them physically. I'm comfortable with that. So there are ways around that those sorts of acts will be even more popular. Fool's Paradise, you can search by type of show as well. So you can kind of look at stuff where you go, I want stilt work, or I want firework, or I want kind of dark work. So you can search in kind of headings, and it will list the various artists that are available with that type of work.
That's brilliant. Okay, let's ask another one. So I think we've probably answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Someone anonymously has said, what not to do when starting out with outdoor art. So I'm going to put caveats on it. Give us 3 things not to do when you're starting out with outdoor arts.
If we're looking at a purely starting out point of view, don't be too ambitious. And that's not, by the very notion of you doing outdoor arts, having not done it before, that's a level of ambition and moving things forward. So do something that you feel really comfortable in doing. It's hard to do don'ts, because my don'ts are more turned into then do's. So don't not do your research. So I think, that's absolutely critical. Make sure that you've looked into those companies. You've not just kind of looked at one YouTube link and gone, right, I'll book that show and email them. So it's really important to kind of not pay it lip service and not be kind of like, oh, it's quick, I've just kind of thrown it out. And don't have that sense of saying it's got to fit really tight parameters and there's no flexibility. If you're going to program this type of work at any scale, learning to be flexible in your approach around, as we said, timing, swans in car parks, weather, those things, are really key. So if you're, say you were programming a venue for your local authority and you're now wanting to do some outdoor art stuff around your markets, you can't treat it as the same. In your head it says, oh, it's artistic, it's creative, it's companies, great, we approach it the same way. It's very different. So I think that being really clear on your expectations, and say, and don't program something huge because this is going to be really impactful, because the level of contingency budgets, we will program, and big international festivals will program huge great pieces of work, but the level of budget they need for contingency, because you literally cannot plan for every occurrence. Critical.
Fascinating. Right. Another question, I think this might be our last one actually, which is from the Queen's Theatre. And this question is a bit of a long one. What advice would you give to new theatre companies or artists who are used to creating and performing indoors about learning to adapt and navigate their work and think about being outdoor arts performers?
It's a brilliant question, and I think it's something that we are obviously seeing a huge amount of in the wider arts and culture sector currently, is that venues feel like that's going to be hard. So companies are going, how do we take our work outside? And I think, for me, that's somebody very passionate about our sector, is that there are people that have been working in this sector for a very long time. And it isn't as simple as lifting Romeo and Juliet off a stage and going, right, we'll now do it in a park. It's a very different animal. So I think it's about, my advice to those younger companies, if it was younger companies, I think.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Would be to kind of spend time talking to outdoor arts companies, to don't assume it's just a case of, right, we're just in a different space now, it's the same process. To get yourself, again, if it's companies, a really brilliant production manager who has worked in the outdoor arts sector and understands that world. Do you bring in a dramaturg to work with you that again has worked in the outdoor sector and understands how that works, to help sort of tell that narrative? Adapting work that you already have to then go outside, I think, is harder. You might want to consider, okay, we're interested in making a new piece of outdoor work. What might that look like, rather than, say, lifting up and just kind of plonking it out there. So I think obviously every artist and company is looking for outputs going forward, and how they can get their work to audiences. Ultimately, that's what artists want to do. They've got something they want to share with an audience. I think if you're coming at it as a company into the sector, is to take the time to do the research, that when events start happening again, to kind of get out and see the work, see how audiences work. Outdoor arts companies, companies like Slung Low, for instance, are the very best at crowd management. They move an audience from place to place seamlessly. They are some of the best traffic control people you could meet, but that they're a theatre company, so it's looking at what you're trying to do. Is it something that's going to move around a city space, or is it literally it's in an outdoor space and there will be seating and an audience will sit and watch it outside, rather than something that takes on the sort of the fabric of the environment they're in? So again, it's about research and working with people. If you can bring them into your production teams who have experience, particularly say production managers that have worked outside. Production managers are vital, and a good outdoor arts production manager will save you so many headaches later down the line, because they will preempt all the things that you're just not thinking of.
This is fantastic. And you know what? We've answered all of the questions from the audience, which I'm really happy about. And I've got, before we finish and I make some closing remarks, David, I've got a final question for you, really. Okay. And I would say now we've kind of downloaded your brain for the internet's use and for the audience's use. What would you say to someone who's kind of teetering on the edge of doing some programming of outdoor arts for a final bit of encouragement? What would you say to them who's kind of on the fence, they're thinking of doing it? How would you encourage them?
Just to do it genuinely. I think it's something, as we said earlier, that you can do with very little experience. You don't need a master's in kind of arts. You can kind of find that work and try it, and you don't often go far wrong. You can kind of tiptoe into this and kind of go, let's just try something, see if that works. So it might be a single walkabout performer on your Sunday market that then might in 5 years time end up being do you know what, that's now a whole weekend festival. I think one for me, in terms of the lockdown process, and what I've really realized, or it's made me remember, is that we need human connection. That's what makes us human. And Zoom and the way we've been working has been a needs to an end, but actually you can't beat that human connection. And I think as hopefully we get towards a better place next year and longer term, that being back to kind of having those moments of shared moments together are going to become more and more important and more valued by people, because we realize what we've missed. And I think outdoor arts for me is still the art form that does that the best in terms of genuinely bringing people together in that shared moment. I can advocate for it more. So having worked in numerous sectors within the arts industries, outdoor arts, in terms of that satisfaction of for real audiences in real places. If you can get 1,000 people out on the streets of a North Yorkshire market town on a Friday night, not in the pubs, engaging with contemporary dance from Europe and think it's the best thing they've ever seen, then that's got to be a good thing. So I think I'd try it, learn from it, be really open-minded, set your success criteria really intelligently in terms of what does it look like. So for me, I'd be going just doing it is the first step, and then we'll learn so much more from that, and just to ask loads of questions, but just to do it. It's a brilliant world to be in, and I'm very fortunate that it's the job I get to do on a daily basis.
Thank you, David. That was really inspiring, really helpful. Thank you, as I say, for letting us download your brain. It's a great note to finish on, and we'll say goodbye to David Edmunds now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
So just to say, from everyone at Severn Arts and the Arches Festivals, thank you for joining us today. There will be a survey going out about the event to help us evaluate what we've done. If there are sessions you haven't booked for yet that are coming up tomorrow, you can still book if you email festivals@severnarts.org.uk to register, because online booking is now closed. The next session is at 10:30 tomorrow, where we've got 3 keynote speakers from figures in the industry, followed by a panel, followed by a reflection session after that with kind of early years producers of outdoor arts, where they're reflecting on the 3 days. So thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.